Welcome to Land of Horror, where horror stories come to life like never before. In today's video, we will explore chilling true events, unsolved mysteries, and the fears lurking in the shadows. From bone-chilling murder cases to supernatural phenomena that defy all explanation, each story will take you on a journey filled with tension and suspense. You will hear about real individuals who have faced terrifying moments, life and death situations, and discoveries that send chills down anyone's spine. Prepare yourself for moments of anxiety and thrills, because these stories aren't just fiction, but the dark truths of life. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications to join us in uncovering even more horrifying mysteries. The summer of 1977 in Eugene, Oregon, radiated a vibrant warmth that filled the air with excitement and adventure. The town buzzed with life, its residents reveling in the sunny days that promised the freedom of youth. Among them was 20-year-old Emily James, a spirited young woman with dreams as bright as the sun overhead. Her long chestnut hair danced in the gentle breeze as she adjusted her backpack and set out for a friend's birthday party, a celebration that would soon take a dark turn. Emily had always loved the thrill of hitchhiking. It was her way of embracing spontaneity, of connecting with the world beyond her small-town life. She made her way to the highway, her heart racing with anticipation, her eyes scanning the road for friendly faces. She believed in the kindness of strangers, that the world was filled with good people willing to lend a helping hand. As she stood by the roadside, a light breeze carried the sound of distant laughter, mingling with the chirping of birds. The sun shone down, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. Hours passed as cars whizzed by, each one a missed opportunity. But Emily remained optimistic. After all, it was just a matter of time before someone would stop. Then, in the distance, she spotted a modest car approaching. A sense of relief washed over her. As it slowed and pulled over, Emily felt a wave of gratitude. The driver, a man in his late 30s with a friendly smile, waved her over. Beside him sat a woman with a warm demeanor. They introduced themselves as Daniel and Lisa Hooker, a couple who were eager to help. "Where are you headed?" Daniel asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "Just to a friend's birthday party," Emily replied, her excitement bubbling over. "I'm so grateful you stopped. Hop in." "We're going that way," Lisa chimed in, her smile genuine. Emily hesitated for just a moment, a faint warning bell ringing in her mind, but the allure of companionship and the warm sun on her face overshadowed her instincts. She climbed into the back seat, oblivious to the chilling reality that awaited her. The car glided smoothly down the winding roads, the scenery shifting from bustling streets to the serene beauty of the Oregon countryside. As they drove, Daniel and Lisa engaged Emily in conversation, asking about her life, her dreams, and her aspirations. It felt like a normal ride, the type of experience that solidified her belief in the goodness of people. However, as they ventured further from the highway and deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to shift. The trees loomed overhead, casting elongated shadows that danced ominously on the ground. Emily glanced out the window, a knot tightening in her stomach as she realized they were no longer on the main road. "Is this the way to the party?" she asked, a hint of unease creeping into her voice. "Just a shortcut," Daniel assured her, his smile wide yet unsettling. "You'll love it out here." Emily wanted to believe him, but as the car ventured deeper into the woods, the surroundings grew eerily quiet, the laughter of children and the sounds of nature fading into silence. The tension in the air thickened, wrapping around her like a shroud. Suddenly, without warning, Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on a narrow dirt path lined with towering trees. Emily's heart raced as Daniel turned to her, his demeanor shifting in an instant. "Get out," he ordered, his voice low and threatening. Fear coursed through Emily's veins as she processed the sudden change in Daniel's tone. "What do you mean?" "I just want to go to my friend's party," she stammered, her mind racing with panic. "Stop playing games," he hissed, reaching behind the seat to retrieve a thick rope. Emily's breath caught in her throat as realization washed over her. She was in a nightmare, trapped with a man who intended to harm her. Before she could react, Daniel lunged at her, his strong hands gripping her arms with vice-like intensity. She fought against him, panic igniting a fire within her, but he was too powerful. In mere seconds, he had her wrists bound tightly with the rope, rendering her helpless. "Let me go. Please," she screamed, desperation flooding her voice. But her cries echoed into the empty woods, swallowed by the silence. Lisa sat in the passenger seat, her face a mask of indifference, a silent accomplice to the horror unfolding. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Daniel warned, his eyes darkening with menace. He pulled her out of the car, dragging her toward the dense forest. Emily's mind raced as she desperately searched for a way out, a glimmer of hope amidst the terror. After what felt like an eternity of struggling against Daniel's grip, they arrived at a small, secluded cabin hidden among the trees. The structure looked abandoned, its windows clouded with grime and the door hanging off its hinges. Emily's heart sank as she realized the depths of her predicament. Daniel pushed her inside, and the overwhelming scent of mildew assaulted her senses. The interior was dimly lit, shadows creeping along the walls as the light struggled to penetrate the gloom. He forced her into a small room at the back of the cabin, a chilling sense of dread enveloping her as he revealed her prison. In the corner of the room, a wooden box stood ominously. It was barely 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide, its surface rough and unpolished. Emily's heart raced as she realized that this would be her confinement, a place where she would be stripped of her freedom. "Welcome to your new home," Daniel sneered, his voice dripping with malice. He opened the box, revealing a cramped interior that promised no comfort or escape. The fear coursing through Emily's veins ignited a primal instinct to fight back, but all she could manage was a whimper. "Please, don't do this," she begged, her voice trembling. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Daniel shoved her into the box, slamming the lid shut with a deafening thud. Emily's world plunged into darkness, the confined space closing in around her. Panic gripped her as she realized the gravity of her situation. She was trapped, isolated from the world, and at the mercy of a man who thrived on fear. Inside the box, the air grew stale and thick, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. Memories of sunlight, laughter, and freedom danced in her mind, a cruel reminder of everything she had lost in an instant. Time lost all meaning as she lay there, her body curling into a ball, desperate for comfort but finding none. The hours turned into days, and the reality of her confinement began to set in. Daniel and Lisa would occasionally open the box, dragging her out for brief moments of light and air, but they were never kind. Daniel would often taunt her, reminding her of her situation, while Lisa would feign sympathy, but there was a chilling emptiness in her eyes. Emily's days blurred together in a monotonous cycle of darkness and despair. In the box, she had no sense of time, no idea of when day turned to night. The only sound she could hear were the echoes of her captor's footsteps and the distant rustle of leaves outside. One evening, after being pulled from the box for chores, Emily found herself alone in the cabin while Daniel went to fetch something from the car. Her heart raced with a flicker of hope as she glanced around, scanning her surroundings for anything that might aid her escape. But as she moved cautiously, every creak of the floorboards felt like a siren call, echoing through the stillness. She felt the walls closing in, the reality of her situation weighing heavily on her. Was there truly no escape? That night, as she lay back in the box, a familiar dread washed over her. The darkness pressed in on her, a suffocating blanket that threatened to drown her hopes. She could feel her sanity slipping away, yet somewhere deep within, a stubborn ember of resistance flickered. She wouldn't let Daniel and Lisa win. In the following weeks, as Emily endured the endless cycle of confinement and despair, she began to adapt to her grim reality. The brief moments of freedom, however limited, became crucial to her mental survival. Daniel would occasionally allow her to interact with his children, a twisted privilege that came with its own set of challenges. During these rare outings, Emily observed the children closely, finding solace in their innocent laughter and playful antics. They reminded her of the joy she had once known, and she clung to those moments like a lifeline. Perhaps, she thought, if she could gain their trust, they might help her escape this nightmare. Yet, the fear of Daniel loomed large. He was always watching, his presence a constant reminder of her vulnerability. He seemed to take pleasure in her obedience, relishing the power he wielded over her. But as time passed, Emily found a sense of resolve building within her. She began to understand the psychological game he played, and she vowed to turn the tables when the opportunity arose. Daniel was cunning, he reveled in manipulating Emily's emotions. He often spun tales of a shadowy organization known as the Company, claiming they would hunt her down if she ever dared to escape. It was a tactic designed to instill fear and control her thoughts, making her believe that no one would come to her aid. Emily learned to navigate this psychological labyrinth, identifying the moments when Daniel would be distracted or preoccupied. She began to develop a plan, carefully observing his routines and seeking weaknesses in his defenses. She knew that the key to her survival lay in biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the weeks stretched into months, Emily's determination intensified. She began to collect small items from her surroundings, things she could use to her advantage, a hairpin here, a broken piece of wood there. Each item was a symbol of hope, a reminder that she could one day reclaim her freedom. One fateful afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, Emily felt a surge of adrenaline course through her. Daniel had left the cabin with the children, and she found herself alone, a rare opportunity she couldn't afford to waste. Her heart raced as she quickly scanned the room for anything that could help her. She spotted a sharp knife lying carelessly on the kitchen counter. It was risky, but her instincts kicked in. With trembling hands, she seized the knife and slipped it into her pocket. As she crept outside, her heart thundered in her chest. She needed to move quickly, to make every second count. The forest loomed around her, both menacing and familiar, and she fought against the instinct to turn back. The woods felt alive with the sounds of nature, and as she dashed between the trees, her senses heightened. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves echoed in her mind as potential threats. She knew she couldn't afford to be caught. Emily ran, the adrenaline fueling her movements as she navigated through the underbrush. The world blurred around her, but she focused on the faint sound of a road in the distance. Freedom was tantalizingly close, but her heart was heavy with fear. Would she be able to reach safety before Daniel returned? With every step, Emily pushed herself harder, her mind filled with images of a life beyond the woods, a life filled with laughter, friends, and freedom. She ran until her legs burned and her lungs ached, driven by the desire to escape the nightmare that had consumed her life. As she approached the road, the sound of a car grew louder, and hope surged within her. She needed to flag down the vehicle, to break free from the chains that bound her. But just as she reached the edge of the woods, she turned back, glancing at the cabin one last time. Would she ever return to this place? Would she ever find a way to reclaim her life? The thoughts swirled in her mind, but for now, her focus was on the road ahead. Finally, with trembling hands, she stepped onto the pavement, her heart pounding with anticipation. A car approached, its headlights illuminating the darkness that surrounded her. Emily waved her arms frantically, desperation flooding her senses. The driver pulled over, a middle-aged man with concern etched across his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes widening as he took in her disheveled appearance. "Please. I need help. I've been kidnapped," she cried, the words spilling out in a rush. The man's expression shifted from concern to alarm, and he quickly ushered her into the passenger seat. As the car sped away, Emily felt the weight of her ordeal begin to lift. She had escaped, but the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. The memory of the box still haunted her, a chilling reminder of the darkness she had overcome. Emily was determined to reclaim her life, to confront the demons that had once held her captive. And as the dawn broke over the horizon, she realized that her journey had only just begun. The sun was just beginning to rise when Emily found herself in the back seat of a police car, staring out at the world she had been forced to leave behind. The warmth of the early morning light should have been comforting, but all she felt was numbness. She had escaped her physical prison, but her mind was still shackled to the memories of captivity. The officers were kind, yet their voices seemed distant as they tried to reassure her that she was safe now. But what did safety mean after 7 years of unimaginable torment? She was no longer the same person who had been abducted. She was someone else, someone who had learned to survive at the edge of sanity. As the car moved through the sleepy town, Emily realized that her escape was just the beginning of a new battle. Freedom had come at a price, and now she had to navigate a world that felt just as alien and terrifying as the one she had left behind. When the police dropped her off at her family's home, the reunion was bittersweet. Her parents, older now, their faces etched with grief and relief, held her tightly. They had never given up hope, even when the rest of the world had. Tears flowed freely, but Emily couldn't cry. The pain was too deep, too embedded in her soul to be washed away by mere tears. Her childhood home, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt foreign. Everything was in its place, yet nothing felt the same. The walls seemed to close in on her as memories of her captivity surged like a flood. Every creak of the floor, every shadow in the corner made her jump. She wasn't sure if she could ever feel safe again. Her parents tried their best to comfort her, but the trauma was too complex for simple words of reassurance. Emily's nights were filled with nightmares, and during the day, she struggled to adjust to the mundane routine of everyday life. She was free, but in many ways, she was still imprisoned by the horrors of the past. The police were eager to hear her story, but reliving the details was excruciating. Emily had to recount every horrific moment: the box, the abuse, the manipulation, the fear. It was like ripping open an old wound that had barely begun to heal. The investigation into Daniel's crimes began to take shape, but the deeper the authorities dug, the more disturbing the story became. Daniel had left a trail of victims before Emily, and the police were only now piecing together the full extent of his monstrous deeds. Emily's testimony was crucial, but it was also emotionally draining. Each time she sat down to speak with detectives, she felt herself being pulled back into the darkness. The more she revealed, the more she realized how deeply Daniel had controlled every aspect of her life. But she couldn't stop now. She had to see this through, not just for herself but for all the other women who had suffered at Daniel's hands. Emily knew that by speaking up, she was taking the first steps toward reclaiming her life. Months passed, and the day of the trial grew closer. Emily had prepared herself as best as she could, but nothing could truly prepare her for the moment when she would have to face Daniel again. The thought of seeing him made her stomach churn with fear and rage. The trial was set to be a media sensation, and Emily dreaded the spotlight. Reporters swarmed. Her family's home, desperate for any detail they could exploit. She became the subject of tabloid headlines, her face plastered across newspapers and television screens. People debated her story, some offering support, others questioning her decisions. Why hadn't she escaped sooner? Why had she stayed? They didn't understand the mental prison she had been trapped in, the fear that Daniel had instilled in her, the threats he had used to control her. Emily tried to block out the noise, but it was impossible. The world was watching, and she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. When the day of the trial finally arrived, Emily walked into the courtroom with her head held high, but her heart was racing. She avoided looking at Daniel, but she could feel his presence, like a dark cloud looming over the room. The courtroom was packed with people, all eager to witness the spectacle of the trial. Emily took the stand, her hands trembling as she recounted her story in front of the jury. She spoke clearly, but each word felt like a stone in her chest. She described the box, the isolation, the manipulation, and the abuse. Every detail was laid bare for the world to see. Daniel sat there, cold and emotionless, as if he were watching a stranger tell a story that had nothing to do with him. Emily wanted to scream, to make him understand the pain he had caused, but she knew that he would never feel remorse. He was a monster in human form, incapable of empathy or regret. As the trial progressed, Emily began to feel a sense of closure. She was no longer the helpless victim. She was the one with the power now. She had survived, and Daniel would never have control over her again. After weeks of testimony, the jury finally delivered their verdict. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom, and for the first time in years, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The nightmare was over. But even as the gavel came down, Emily knew that her journey wasn't truly over. The scars of her captivity would remain with her for the rest of her life. She would have to learn how to live again, how to trust again, how to reclaim the pieces of herself that Daniel had tried to destroy. The months following the trial were a blur of therapy sessions and attempts to reintegrate into normal life. Emily struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, haunted by flashbacks and panic attacks. She found solace in support groups, where she met other survivors who understood her pain. Together, they helped each other heal, sharing their stories and offering comfort in the knowledge that they weren't alone. Emily began to rebuild her life, one small step at a time. She took up painting as a form of therapy, finding a way to express the emotions that words couldn't capture. Her art was dark and abstract, but it was hers, and through it, she began to reclaim her sense of identity. As time passed, Emily grew stronger. She enrolled in college, determined to pursue a career in psychology to help others who had experienced trauma. Her past would always be a part of her, but she refused to let it define her future. She moved out of her parents' house and into a small apartment of her own. It wasn't much, but it was hers, a symbol of her independence. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of control over her life. Emily knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had survived the unthinkable, and that strength would carry her through the rest of her life. As she stood in front of a mirror one morning, looking at the woman she had become, Emily realized that she was no longer defined by her past. She was a survivor, and her story was one of resilience, courage, and hope. Emily had come a long way since the trial. She was in a better place, both physically and mentally, yet the shadows of her past lingered, often creeping back into her thoughts at the most unexpected moments. The world around her had moved on, but the trauma she had endured felt like a ghost that refused to leave her side. She settled into her routine at college, where she pursued her studies in psychology with passion. Each day, she felt a little more like herself, driven by the desire to help others who had faced similar horrors. However, there were moments when the memories surged forth, flooding her mind with images that sent her spiraling back to her time in captivity. The nightmares continued, relentless in their assault. She often woke in a cold sweat, the echoes of her abductor's voice ringing in her ears. At times, it felt like she was living two lives, one filled with hope and healing, and another drowned in darkness. One afternoon, while studying at a local coffee shop, Emily noticed a familiar face. It was a woman she had met in therapy, Jessica, who had been abducted for a short time but had still endured unimaginable trauma. They exchanged a smile, and Emily invited her to join her table. As they talked, Emily felt a connection that was hard to put into words. They shared their experiences, laughter, and tears, finding solace in one another's company. It felt good to bond over shared experiences, something she had missed since the trial. But as the conversation deepened, Emily found herself glancing nervously toward the door. A sense of unease began to wash over her. Triggered by the memory of Daniel. What if he somehow knew where she was? The thought made her skin crawl. "Hey, are you okay?" Jessica asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Emily nodded, forcing a smile, but the knot in her stomach remained. "I'm fine, just a little tired." Jessica studied her for a moment before changing the subject, but Emily's mind raced. What if she wasn't truly safe? What if Daniel had accomplices, or worse, if he managed to escape? In the weeks that followed, Emily's anxiety heightened. She began to notice things that sent her heart racing: a car parked outside her apartment for too long, a figure that seemed to follow her down the street. Every sound felt amplified, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Determined to take control of her life, Emily started taking self-defense classes. She learned how to protect herself physically, but the mental toll was exhausting. Each punch, each kick, was an exercise in confronting her fears. She learned to harness her anger, using it as fuel to fight back against her past. Emily confided in Jessica about her growing paranoia, but Jessica encouraged her to be cautious yet rational. "It's normal to feel this way after what we've been through," she reassured her. "But don't let it control you." Despite Jessica's words, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. She knew she had to remain vigilant, not just for herself, but for the possibility of other survivors who might be out there. One Friday evening, Emily decided to treat herself to a night out. She met up with Jessica and a few other classmates at a local bar. Laughter and music filled the air, temporarily drowning out the weight of her worries. For a brief moment, she felt like a regular 20-something, free from the chains of her past. As the night wore on, Emily allowed herself to relax, drinking a few glasses of wine and enjoying the company of new friends. They danced and sang along to the music, forgetting their troubles, if only for a night. But as the clock struck midnight, her laughter faded. A man entered the bar, and something about him sent a chill down her spine. He was tall, with dark hair and an intense gaze that seemed to search the room for something, or someone. She felt a wave of nausea as his eyes locked onto hers. "Hey, are you okay?" Jessica asked, noticing Emily's sudden shift in mood. Emily shook her head, unable to articulate her fear. "I don't know. I feel like I've seen him before." "Maybe it's just someone who looks familiar," Jessica suggested, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread. As the men moved through the crowd, Emily felt an urgent need to leave. She grabbed her purse and turned to Jessica. "I think I need to go." "Let me walk you home," Jessica offered, sensing her distress. Emily nodded, grateful for her friend's support. Together, they made their way through the dimly lit streets, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the men had followed them, his presence lingering like a shadow. As they rounded a corner, Emily's heart raced when she spotted the men standing by a parked car, watching them intently. He was too close for comfort, and she felt a surge of panic. "We need to hurry," she whispered to Jessica, her voice trembling. They quickened their pace, but just as they reached the entrance to Emily's apartment building, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat as she faced the men from the bar. "Emily," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "I've been looking for you." Emily's stomach dropped. "What do you want?" she demanded, instinctively stepping closer to Jessica. "I just want to talk," he replied, his tone eerily calm. "I know what you've been through, and I think we can help each other." "Help each other?" Jessica interjected, stepping in front of Emily. "Get away from her." The man's demeanor shifted, his smile fading. "You don't understand. There are people who want to hurt you, and I'm trying to protect you." Emily's heart raced as she processed his words. How did he know about her? Who were these people? She felt trapped, and a surge of anger bubbled to the surface. "I don't need your help. Leave us alone." Before he could respond, Emily pulled Jessica inside the building, slamming the door shut. They rushed to her apartment, locking the door behind them. Emily's heart pounded as they leaned against the door, catching their breath. "Who the hell was that?" Jessica gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "I have no idea," Emily replied, her mind racing. "But we need to report him. I don't know how he found me, but I can't take any chances." They called the police, but as they waited for officers to arrive, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her. What if this was just the beginning? What if Daniel's reach extended beyond the walls of his prison? When the police arrived, Emily recounted the events, but they seemed skeptical. "Unless he's done something criminal, there's not much we can do," the officer said, jotting down notes. Emily felt frustrated, her fears brushed aside. "You don't understand. He knows things about me. He could be a threat. Just stay vigilant," the officer advised, "and let us know if he shows up again." As they left, Emily and Jessica exchanged worried glances. "What if he comes back?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Emily replied, feeling the weight of uncertainty bear down on her. In the days that followed, Emily was hypervigilant. She changed her routines, avoided places she frequented, and even began carrying pepper spray in her bag. She took extra precautions, installing a security system in her apartment and keeping her phone charged at all times. Despite her efforts, the fear never fully dissipated. The man's face haunted her, and the thought that someone was watching her sent her spiraling into anxiety. She struggled to focus on her studies, her mind clouded by paranoia. But Emily refused to let her fears control her. She began attending self-defense classes again, pushing herself to learn more techniques. Each class made her feel a little more empowered, a little less like a victim. She was determined to reclaim her life, no matter what. One evening, while attending a self-defense class, Emily met a fellow student named Mark. He was kind and attentive, and as they practiced together, Emily found herself opening up to him. He listened as she shared her story, never judging, only offering support. "Your strength is inspiring," Mark said, his eyes warm with understanding. "You've been through so much, and yet you're still fighting." Emily smiled, grateful for his words. "I have to keep moving forward. I can't let the past define me." As their friendship blossomed, Mark became a source of comfort in her life. They started spending more time together outside of class, grabbing coffee and going for walks. For the first time since her ordeal, Emily felt a spark of happiness. But as she began to trust again, a nagging voice in the back of her mind warned her that she couldn't let her guard down completely. The memories of Daniel loomed like a storm cloud, threatening to overshadow her newfound joy. One evening, while Emily was out with Mark, she spotted the men from the bar across the street. He was staring at her, and her heart dropped. Panic surged through her as she instinctively grabbed Mark's arm. "Let's go," she said urgently, pulling him away from the scene. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "I saw him. The guy who confronted me," Emily replied, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." Mark's expression hardened as he scanned the street. "Are you sure it's him?" Emily nodded, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. We have to leave. Now. They hurried back to her apartment, the tension palpable. Once inside, Emily locked the door and leaned against it, her breath coming in heavy gasps. Mark moved closer, concern evident in his eyes. Emily, you're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she felt the weight of her fears crashing down on her. But what if he comes back? What if he knows where I live? We'll figure it out together, Mark assured her, his voice steady. You're not alone in this. The next morning, Emily received an unexpected phone call. It was the police, informing her that they had apprehended the men from the bar for harassing other women in the area. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of unease. What if he had been working with someone else? Despite the apprehension, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could finally start to reclaim her life. She continued attending her classes and meeting Mark, allowing herself to feel more at ease. But as the days turned into weeks, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still lurking. She decided to confront her fears head-on by attending a support group for survivors, hoping to connect with others who understood her struggles. In the support group, Emily met a diverse group of individuals, each with their own stories of survival. As they shared their experiences, she felt a sense of solidarity that comforted her. It was empowering to hear their stories of resilience and courage. One woman, Sarah, had been abducted for years before escaping. Her tale was harrowing, yet she exuded a strength that inspired Emily. We're all survivors, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. And together, we can support each other through the darkest times. Emily felt a surge of hope. She realized she wasn't alone, there were others who understood the battles she faced. As Emily continued to attend the support group, she found herself healing in ways she never expected. She learned to lean on her newfound friends and found solace in their shared experiences. With each meeting, she felt the weight of her past slowly lifting. Mark continued to be a steady presence in her life, and their bond deepened. He encouraged her to pursue her dreams in psychology and even offered to help her with her studies. One evening, as they studied together, Emily looked at Mark, gratitude filling her heart. Thank you for being there for me, she said softly. I don't know what I would do without you. Mark smiled, his gaze sincere. You're stronger than you realize, Emily. I'm just here to support you. One rainy evening, Emily received an ominous text message. You can't run from me. I'm always watching. Her heart raced as fear consumed her. She quickly texted Mark, who rushed over to her apartment. We need to go to the police, he said, determination in his voice. Emily nodded, her heart pounding as they made their way to the station. But as they approached, she spotted a familiar figure lurking in the shadows, the men from the bar. Stay back. Mark shouted, stepping in front of Emily. The man laughed, his tone taunting. You think you can hide from me? I've been waiting for this moment. Emily felt paralyzed by fear. What do you want? She demanded, her voice trembling. Just to remind you that you're never truly safe, he sneered, taking a step closer. But just as he moved, Mark lunged forward, grabbing the man and tackling him to the ground. Call for help. Mark shouted, grappling with the men as he struggled. Emily quickly dialed 911, her hands shaking as she relayed the situation. The police arrived within minutes, apprehending the men and taking him into custody. As the officers led him away, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had faced her fears head-on, and despite the trauma, she had emerged stronger. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued to attend therapy and support groups, determined to heal. She and Mark grew closer, and she finally allowed herself to embrace the possibility of a future free from fear. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the park, Mark turned to her, his eyes sparkling. I think you're ready to take the next step, he said, a smile on his face. Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with hope. What do you mean? I mean, you're ready to share your story. You can help others who've been through similar experiences, he encouraged. Emily felt a wave of determination wash over her. She had spent so long in the shadows, but now it was time to step into the light. You're right. I want to help others. With renewed purpose, Emily began volunteering at the support group, sharing her story and offering encouragement to others. She had transformed her pain into power, using her experiences to inspire those still trapped in their own darkness. As she stood before a group of survivors, Emily felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She was no longer just a victim, she was a warrior, a beacon of hope for those still fighting their battles. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but Emily was ready to face it head-on. With the support of her friends, newfound strength, and a determination to help others, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Her journey was far from over, but as she looked out at the faces of her peers, she knew she was not alone. Together, they would rise, shining a light in the darkest of places, proving that even in the face of unimaginable horror, hope could prevail. Emily had settled into a rhythm. She volunteered regularly at the support group, using her own experience to help others navigate their trauma. With Mark by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. However, beneath the surface of her newfound confidence, old fears lurked like shadows, ready to pounce. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Emily received a call from Jessica. "Hey, can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important," Jessica said, her voice laced with urgency. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Emily asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "Let's just meet at the park." "I'll explain when I see you," Jessica replied. Emily agreed, her mind racing with possibilities. As she walked to the park, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. When Emily arrived, she spotted Jessica sitting on a bench, looking anxious. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, taking a seat beside her. "I've been having some strange experiences lately," Jessica confessed, glancing around as if afraid someone might be eavesdropping. "It's like someone is following me." Emily felt her heart race. "What do you mean? Have you seen anyone?" "Not directly, but I feel it. I've noticed the same car parked outside my apartment a few times, and I keep seeing a figure in the distance," Jessica said, her eyes wide with fear. Emily's stomach twisted. "Did you tell the police?" "No, I didn't want to sound paranoid," Jessica replied, biting her lip. "But I thought you might understand." "I do," Emily said, feeling a sense of dread creeping back. "We should take this seriously. Let's report it together." After leaving the park, Emily and Jessica went straight to the police station. As they explained the situation, the officer listened attentively. "We'll look into it," he assured them, but Emily could tell he was skeptical. As they walked back to their cars, Jessica sighed. "What if it's just my imagination?" "It could be," Emily replied, but deep down, she felt a sense of urgency. But it's better to be safe than sorry. Over the next few days, the anxiety of potential danger began to gnaw at Emily. She felt compelled to stay vigilant, aware that her fears might not be unfounded. That evening, as Emily sat in her living room working on her assignments, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced out the window, scanning the street below. It was dark, but she could see the faint outline of a car parked across the road. Her heart raced as she squinted, trying to see if anyone was inside. The feeling of dread settled into her bones. Was someone truly stalking Jessica? Or had her own trauma begun to warp her perception of reality? Emily took a deep breath and called Mark. "Hey, can you come over?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course." "What's going on?" he replied, concern evident in his tone. "I just need someone here with me," she admitted, her anxiety bubbling to the surface. When Mark arrived, he noticed her tense demeanor immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I think someone is watching me," she whispered, pointing toward the window. Mark moved to the window, glancing outside. "I don't see anything unusual. Just the car." "It's been there for hours," she insisted. Mark stepped closer to the window, scanning the street. "It could just be a coincidence. But if it makes you uncomfortable, let's report it." With Mark by her side, Emily felt a little braver. They made a plan to file a report together, determined to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. The next day, as Emily and Mark were leaving for the police station, they noticed Jessica sitting on the steps of the building, her face pale. "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, concern flooding her voice. "I couldn't sleep last night," Jessica admitted, her voice shaky. "I saw someone outside my apartment." "What did they look like?" Mark asked, his protective instincts kicking in. I couldn't see clearly, but they were wearing a hood and kept glancing around, Jessica explained, tears pooling in her eyes. I thought it was just my imagination, but I don't know anymore. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. We have to take this seriously. We'll go to the police together. At the police station, Emily, Jessica, and Mark recounted their experiences to a different officer this time. He took their concerns seriously and assured them that they would investigate further. Do you have any specific details about the person or the car? He asked, taking notes. Just a black sedan, Jessica replied, her voice trembling. But it's been parked outside my building a few times. As they left the station, Emily felt a sense of camaraderie among them, a shared understanding that they were all in this together. We'll keep each other safe, she promised, looking at Jessica and Mark. Days turned into weeks, and the unsettling feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. Emily noticed her anxiety creeping back, often accompanied by insomnia and a nagging sense of paranoia. One evening, as she lay in bed, the shadows in her room felt more pronounced, and every creak of the building sent her heart racing. She reached for her phone and sent a quick text to Mark, hoping he would respond quickly. Can you come over? I'm feeling really anxious. Within minutes, her phone buzzed. On my way. When Mark arrived, he found Emily curled up on the couch, her eyes wide with fear. I can't shake this feeling, she confessed. Let's watch a movie to distract you, he suggested, settling beside her. As they turned on a film, Emily tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting back to the black sedan and the figure she couldn't quite shake. The following week, as Emily and Mark were walking to class, Emily spotted the black sedan parked across the street. Her heart sank as she recognized the hooded figure sitting inside. Mark, look, she gasped, pointing. Mark turned and saw the figure. Stay close to me, he said firmly, wrapping his arm around her waist as they hurried past. But as they walked, the figure suddenly stepped out of the car, his face obscured by the hood. Emily, he called out, his voice chilling. Emily froze, her breath hitching in her throat. Run! Mark shouted, pulling her along as they sprinted toward the campus building. They dashed inside, adrenaline surging through their veins. Once they reached a crowded area, they paused to catch their breath, panic and confusion swirling around them. What did he want? Emily asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, but we need to report this, Mark said, determination etched on his face. They rushed to the campus security office and explained the situation. The officer listened, jotting down notes, and promised to increase patrols around the area. As they left the office, Emily felt a mix of fear and resolve. We have to take this seriously, she insisted. I can't let this person control my life. Mark nodded, but he too felt the weight of uncertainty. The more they tried to confront the danger, the more elusive it seemed. Days turned into weeks, and the tension escalated. Emily began to feel isolated, her fear pushing her friends away. She avoided going out and declined invitations, preferring the safety of her apartment. One evening, while scrolling through social media, she noticed a post from Jessica. I've seen the figure again. It's getting worse. I'm scared, it read. Emily's heart raced as she quickly called Jessica. We need to meet. This has to stop. Jessica agreed, and they arranged to meet at a cafe. As Emily made her way there, anxiety clawed at her. What if the figure was there, waiting for them? When Emily arrived at the cafe, she spotted Jessica sitting at a table, her hands trembling. You look terrified, Emily said, sliding into the seat across from her. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, Jessica confessed, her voice shaky. And I saw the figure again yesterday. This time, he was right outside my window. Emily felt a wave of panic. We have to take action. This isn't just in our heads. As they talked, Emily noticed a man at the far end of the cafe, his eyes trained on them. Do you see that guy? She whispered to Jessica. He keeps staring at us. Jessica glanced over and gasped. What if it's him? Emily felt a surge of adrenaline. Let's get out of here. They hurriedly left the cafe, but as they stepped outside, they spotted the same black sedan parked nearby, the engine running. The figure sat behind the wheel, watching them intently. Run! Emily yelled, grabbing Jessica's hand as they sprinted down the street. The sound of tires screeching behind them sent adrenaline coursing through their veins. "Where do we go?" Jessica cried, panic in her eyes. "Just keep running," Emily shouted, leading her into a narrow alley. They weaved through the twisting paths, hearts pounding as they heard the sound of the car engine revving behind them. The figure was pursuing them. Finally, they ducked into a small storefront and quickly hid behind a rack of clothes. Their breaths came in sharp gasps, and Emily's mind raced with fear. "Do you think he saw us?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "I hope not," Emily replied, her heart hammering in her chest. "But we can't stay here for long." After a few tense moments, they carefully peeked out from behind the rack, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. "We have to get back to campus and tell Mark," Emily said, her voice steadying. As they made their way back, a wave of relief washed over them when they finally spotted Mark waiting near the entrance. He rushed over, concern etched on his face. "What happened? Are you okay?" "We saw him." "The figure from before," Emily panted, glancing around nervously. Mark's expression hardened. "We need to get the police involved again. This has gone too far." They quickly made their way to the police station, their hearts racing with every step. When they arrived, they explained everything to the officers on duty. The officers took their report seriously and promised to increase patrols in the area. "We're going to do everything we can to find this individual," one officer said, reassuring them. As they left the station, Emily felt a sense of determination. "We can't let fear win. We need to be proactive." Mark nodded, a fierce protective instinct shining in his eyes. "We'll keep each other safe. I promise." Over the next few days, they took precautions, changing their routines, avoiding isolated areas, and staying in touch with friends and family. One evening, Emily received a text message from an unknown number. "You can't hide forever. I will find you." Her heart sank, panic flooding her senses. "Mark, come over." "I just got a threatening message," she said, her voice shaking. He arrived quickly, his expression serious. "We need to take this to the police immediately." They hurried back to the station and reported the new message. The officers were alarmed but also encouraged Emily to document any further messages. Days turned into a blur of anxiety and fear. Emily felt as if she was living in a nightmare that wouldn't end. She confided in Mark and Jessica, who provided her with constant support, but the feeling of dread clung to her. One evening, while scrolling through her social media feed, she stumbled across a page dedicated to unsolved crimes in the area. As she browsed through the posts, one caught her attention, a case involving a series of disappearances linked to a figure resembling the men who had been following her and Jessica. Emily's stomach churned as she read the details. "Mark, you need to see this," she said, showing him the post. Mark's eyes widened. "This is serious. We need to contact the police again and share this information." After their visit to the police station, Emily felt a surge of determination. They had gathered enough evidence to make the officers take the threat seriously. As they continued their investigation, they discovered that Jessica had been receiving similar messages, heightening the urgency of their situation. The figure had become more brazen, and they knew they needed to act fast. Emily and Mark spent hours researching online, trying to find any clues or connections that could lead them to the identity of the men following them. Weeks passed, and Emily's anxiety mounted. One day, as they were walking through the park, they spotted the same black sedan parked nearby. "There it is again," Jessica exclaimed, panic rising in her voice. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Let's confront it. We can't keep running." With determination in their hearts, they approached the vehicle, ready to face whatever lay within. As they neared, the driver's side window rolled down, revealing a man with a sinister grin. "I've been waiting for you," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. Emily felt her heart race as she stepped back, fear coursing through her veins. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to sound brave. "Just a little chat," he replied, his tone mocking. Just then, Mark stepped in front of Emily, shielding her from view. "You need to leave us alone," he said, his voice firm. "We're not afraid of you." The man laughed. A chilling sound that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "You think you can escape me? I know where you live." Before she could react, the men revved the engine and sped away, leaving them standing in shock. The encounter left them shaken, but they knew they couldn't let fear control their lives any longer. They returned to the police station and reported the incident, urging them to take immediate action. The officers promised to increase patrols around their neighborhoods, assuring them that they would do everything possible to protect them. In the following weeks, Emily, Mark, and Jessica continued their efforts to stay vigilant. They developed a safety plan, ensuring they always traveled together and avoided secluded areas. Emily also began attending self-defense classes, determined to regain a sense of control over her life. With each lesson, she felt her confidence grow, empowering her to stand up against her fears. One night, while reflecting on her journey, Emily realized she needed to confront her past fully. She decided to reach out to her therapist, hoping to process the trauma she had experienced and move forward. During their sessions, she delved deep into her fears, exploring how they had impacted her life and relationships. With her therapist's guidance, Emily began to unravel the knots of anxiety that had formed over the years. As she continued her journey of healing, Emily discovered new aspects of herself: strength, resilience, and the ability to embrace vulnerability. She learned to lean on her friends for support, allowing their love to lift her. Slowly but surely, the dark clouds began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of clarity and hope. One sunny afternoon, as Emily and Mark strolled through the park, she felt a sense of freedom wash over her. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she said, smiling at Mark. "I'm proud of you, Emily," he replied, his eyes shining with admiration. "You've come so far." "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, squeezing his hand. As they walked hand in hand, Emily realized she was ready to reclaim her life fully. The shadows may linger, but she had found the strength to face them head-on. As the months passed, Emily, Mark, and Jessica found solace in their friendship. They continued to support one another, and Emily felt empowered to share her story with others in the support group, helping them navigate their journeys of healing. One evening, as they gathered for a group session, Emily stood before her peers, feeling a sense of purpose. "We're not defined by our past, we're defined by how we rise above it," she said, her voice strong. The room filled with applause, and Emily felt a surge of gratitude. She had transformed her pain into a source of strength, proving that even in the darkest of times, hope could prevail. As Emily walked home that night, she marveled at how far she had come. The journey was far from over, but she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With each step, she embraced her strength and resilience, knowing that she had the power to overcome any obstacle. The world may be full of shadows, but Emily was determined to shine her light, illuminating the path for herself and others. As spring blossomed in full bloom, Emily found herself at a crossroads, eager to embrace the fresh start she had fought so hard to achieve. Each day felt like a victory, a testament to her resilience against the darkness that had threatened to consume her. She had become an advocate for victims of stalking, sharing her story at community events, hoping to inspire others trapped in their fears. Emily had also taken on a new job at a local nonprofit organization that focused on empowering women and providing resources for those affected by violence. She felt passionate about the mission, channeling her pain into something meaningful. It was fulfilling, yet the shadows of her past still lingered in the corners of her mind, a constant reminder of what she had overcome. Despite the progress she made, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. It was a creeping paranoia that made her glance over her shoulder more often than she'd like to admit. One evening, after a long day at work, she and Mark decided to go for a run in the park. As they jogged along the familiar path, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced in the twilight. Emily felt a thrill of freedom as they pushed themselves, but that sense of joy was quickly overshadowed by an unsettling feeling. "Do you ever feel like we're being followed?" Emily asked, trying to keep her tone light. Mark shot her a reassuring smile. "We're safe, Emily. You're not alone anymore. Remember that." His words were comforting, but Emily couldn't shake the cold knot forming in her stomach. A few days later, Emily received a package at her office. It was a small, unmarked box that seemed innocuous enough. Curiosity piqued, she opened it and found a simple note inside: "I'm always watching." Her heart dropped as panic flooded her senses. Mark had promised to protect her, but how could he do that against an unknown threat? She took the note to the police, who took her report seriously, but they needed more evidence to act. Days turned into weeks, and Emily continued her routine, but the feeling of being watched grew more intense. She started documenting her experiences, jotting down every strange encounter, every odd feeling that crept over her. At work, she found herself glancing out the window, scanning the streets for any sign of the figure that had haunted her life. Mark noticed her change in demeanor and tried to help by accompanying her to and from work, even meeting her for lunch. Yet, she knew she couldn't keep relying on him forever. One night, as Emily was getting ready for bed, she heard a soft knock at her front door. She froze, her heart racing. Mark had just left after a dinner date, and she hadn't expected anyone else. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice shaking. There was no answer, only silence. After a moment of hesitation, she approached the door and peeked through the peephole. The sight of a familiar figure made her blood run cold. It was the man from the black sedan. In a moment of sheer instinct, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her heart pounding as she watched the man pace outside her door. "Please, hurry," she whispered, keeping her voice low. The sound of sirens filled the night air as Emily's breath caught in her throat. She backed away from the door, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. Moments later, the police arrived, shining their flashlights around the area. When they knocked on her door, she opened it, relief flooding her senses. "He's right outside," she said urgently, pointing to the man who was now lurking in the shadows. The officer stepped outside, calling for the men to come forward. Emily watched from the safety of her doorway as the figure froze, his face turning to a mask of anger before he turned and fled down the street. The police couldn't catch him, but they assured Emily they would increase patrols in her neighborhood. Still, the feeling of safety had been shattered, and she couldn't shake the thought that he would return. The incident left her feeling vulnerable. Mark remained a constant source of support, but she knew she had to confront her fears head-on. Determined to take control of her life, Emily signed up for self-defense classes. Each session brought a surge of empowerment, teaching her how to protect herself both physically and mentally. She found solace in the camaraderie of the women around her, each with their own stories of survival. They became a tight-knit group, sharing their fears and triumphs, and Emily realized she was not alone in her fight. Weeks passed, and one evening during class, the instructor introduced a guest speaker, a former detective who specialized in stalking cases. Emily listened intently as he shared insights and strategies for dealing with stalkers. "That feeling of being watched is more than just paranoia," he explained. "It's a very real experience. Trust your instincts. If you feel threatened, take action." His words resonated deeply with Emily, igniting a fire within her. After the session, she approached him to share her story and learn more about the resources available to victims. With renewed determination, Emily established connections with local support groups, and she began organizing community events focused on awareness and prevention. She wanted to empower others to break the silence surrounding stalking and violence. Through her efforts, she met a woman named Sarah, whose daughter had been a victim of a similar situation. The two quickly bonded over their shared experiences, and together, they worked tirelessly to create a network of support for survivors. One night, as Emily prepared for an awareness event, she received another message. "You're getting too comfortable. I will find you." Chills ran down her spine as she read the message, but this time, instead of fear, anger surged within her. "I won't let you win," she whispered to herself, determination flooding her veins. She knew she had to take a stand, not only for herself but for others who had suffered in silence. On the day of the event, Emily spoke passionately about her experiences, sharing her story with an audience of eager listeners. She felt empowered, her voice steady as she encouraged others to break their silence. As she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and Emily felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She had transformed her pain into action, inspiring others to stand up against their fears. But even as she celebrated her success, Emily remained vigilant. The messages continued, each one more threatening than the last. She documented everything, sharing it with the police, who assured her they were working on a plan. Emily knew she had to remain strong, but the weight of fear was heavy. She refused to let it consume her, clinging to the support of her friends and the community she had built. One evening, while attending a support group meeting, Emily received a call from Mark. His voice was urgent as he explained he had spotted the man from the black sedan lurking around the area. "I think he's watching you, Emily," he said, worry etched in his tone. Panic set in, and Emily rushed home, her heart racing. As she entered her apartment, she locked the door behind her and peered through the window blinds, scanning the street. The next day, Emily met with the police to discuss a safety plan. They recommended installing security cameras and increasing patrols in her area. "I need to feel safe in my own home," she insisted, her voice steady. The officers nodded, promising to take her concerns seriously. Emily was determined to regain her sense of security, knowing she couldn't live in fear any longer. Over the next few days, Emily had a security system installed in her apartment, complete with cameras and motion sensors. It gave her a sense of control, something she had been missing for so long. With every passing day, she felt stronger, bolstered by her newfound support network. Emily was not just a survivor, she was a warrior, ready to fight for her life and the lives of others. One night, as Emily sat at her kitchen table reviewing her notes for an upcoming meeting, she noticed something on the security camera feed. A figure stood outside her apartment, just beyond the reach of the street lights. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone and called Mark. "He's back," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stay inside." "I'm on my way," he replied, urgency lacing his tone. As Emily watched the figure through the camera, she felt a mix of fear and anger. She was done being a victim. Minutes felt like hours as she waited for Mark to arrive. She remained by the window, her breath steady, ready to face whatever came next. When Mark finally arrived, he rushed inside, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to call the police. They can't let him get away this time," he said firmly. Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it together." The police arrived quickly, and Emily provided them with the footage from her security cameras. They sprang into action, combing the area for the men who had haunted her for far too long. As they searched, Emily felt a surge of hope. This time, she was not powerless, she had the law on her side. Hours later, the police returned with a lead. They had found the man's vehicle, and a few days later, they tracked him down. Emily's heart raced with anticipation and fear as she prepared to face her tormentor in court. It was time to take back her narrative and ensure that he would never have the chance to harm her or anyone else again. The day of the trial arrived, and Emily sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as she watched the men being led in. He looked different now, his bravado stripped away, and she felt a flicker of satisfaction. As she took the stand, she recounted her experiences, every painful detail spilling from her lips. The weight of her words felt cathartic, and for the first time, she felt the power of her story. The jury deliberated, and when the verdict was read, guilty, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, and she knew she had played a part in preventing future violence. As she left the courtroom, Mark took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "You did it, Emily. You're free." In the months that followed, Emily focused on healing. She continued her advocacy work and spent time with Mark, who had become her rock. They explored new places, trying to create new memories that would overshadow the darkness of her past. Emily learned the importance of self-care, seeking therapy to help process her trauma. She surrounded herself with supportive friends and found strength in vulnerability. As time passed, the shadows of her past began to fade. Emily felt more like herself each day, embracing life with newfound appreciation. One evening, as she and Mark watched the sunset, she turned to him, her heart full. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. Mark smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're stronger than you know, Emily. I'm proud of you." Emily's journey inspired others to come forward, sharing their stories of survival. The community rallies grew stronger, and she felt grateful for the connections she had formed. Through her advocacy work, she established a scholarship for survivors, allowing them to pursue their dreams despite their pasts. Emily knew firsthand how important it was to break the cycle of silence. With each passing day, Emily felt a sense of hope and purpose. She was determined to turn her pain into a force for good, knowing that she could inspire change. One day, as she spoke at a local event, she felt the familiar rush of empowerment. The audience was captivated by her story, and she realized she had transformed her narrative from one of fear into one of strength. As summer approached, Emily decided to take a trip to the coast, seeking solace by the ocean. She wanted to reflect on her journey, to feel the waves wash away the remnants of her past. Sitting on the beach, she closed her eyes and listened to the soothing sound of the waves. She felt a sense of peace envelop her, knowing she had emerged stronger from the shadows. Returning home, Emily knew that her life was forever changed. The darkness had not defeated her. Instead, it had ignited a fire within her, fueling her desire to help others. As she continued her work, Emily embraced the light, refusing to let fear dictate her future. She was a survivor, an advocate, and a beacon of hope for those who still struggled in silence. With every step she took, Emily moved forward with purpose, knowing that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had built a life filled with love, support, and resilience, and she was ready to embrace the future. Emily's journey would never be complete. There would always be work to do, voices to uplift, and stories to share. But as she looked toward the horizon, she knew one thing for certain: she would never again let the shadows define her.